So if you know me at all, you might wonder what I'm doing up here. I want to study octopuses, but the road to octopus research is paved with fish, and so that is my smelly, smelly path. My story begins with a big breakup, like all great love stories. I was a marine biology major at Cal State Long Beach, and I thought I was working really hard until I realized how much work I wasn't doing until I got out of this really nasty, controlling relationship, and suddenly I had all the time in the world to do whatever I wanted. It's awesome. But that didn't really last very long. I got an email from a graduate student in the shark lab named Ryan, who needed help catching California halibut in the Huntington Beach wetlands for his project. And I caught my first halibut that weekend, and suffice it to say, I was never the same again. I bet you thought I was gonna say I was hooked. Well, I mean, I was hooked. I filled all of my time, not spare time, all of my time with Ryan and his lab mates, catching fish, tracking fish, repairing fishing gear in the lab, on the boat, in the mud, really anything they asked of me. I knew that tying knots and hauling sandbags was gonna prove that I belonged in an octopus lab just somewhere, someday. I just knew it. All I had to do was fish. So about a year into volunteering in the shark lab, the summer before my senior year, I was awarded the opportunity to be a paid intern for the local Department of Fish and Game office. It was Fish and Game back then, it's wildlife now, but if you know anything about biology, being a paid intern is a big deal. And I was so excited. I ran to the lab to tell my friends I wasn't gonna be spending as much of the summer with them as they had thought, but I just knew they'd be so excited for me to finally get the opportunity to spend some time away from the shark lab. So Ryan asked me, "Oh, who's your new supervisor gonna be?" And he proceeded to laugh in my face because this Erica person had just graduated from the shark lab not that long before, but it didn't matter. I was gonna research fish so hard at the Department of Fish and Game that Poseidon or King Triton or Beyonce, whoever decided these things, was gonna let me see my sacrifice and let me research octopuses. And thus began the most relentless period in my undergraduate career, which I lovingly refer to as the summer of fish. June started out pretty innocuously. I started working full-time for the Department of Fish and Game, the project that was looking at our local population of kelp bass, and you might also know that as calico bass. I dutifully learned how to cut little sections of ear bones out of these fish, and then I glued them to slides so that Erica could see how old each fish had been when it was caught. And we also caught live kelp bass and brought them back to Cal State Long Beach so I could take care of them all summer. And sure, I was spending most of my summer in a windowless room deep in the belly of the Fish and Game office. And sure, I found out that I was only getting paid at the end of the 10-week full-time internship. And sure, this huge bottle of noxious glue that they gave me didn't actually come with instructions. It just came with chemical warnings. I'm happy I only have 2 arms at this point. But, you know, didn't matter. It was gonna be great. I was working with wonderful people like Erica, who was already introducing me to some really important fish people in Southern California. And I was learning all of these really important skills that I just knew I was gonna carry forward with me, you know, when I studied octopuses, like Beyonce would let me. So, you know, I just downloaded my first audiobook, sat down, and settled into the fish dungeon. At that point, it became my singular focus to make the most of the summer of fish. But fortunately, I managed to maintain my work-life balance. I spent all my nights and weekends working with the graduate students. But, I was chasing fish in a kayak and hauling heavy equipment, and, that was my social life and my physical fitness. Check and check. I was also working in a second lab on campus. It mostly involved cleaning worm poop in the evenings. And that meant I was working 50 hours a week for 10 hours of pay, but, that was my income. Check. When I wasn't cleaning up worm poop, I was feeding those fish that I'd caught at the beginning of the summer, and their favorite thing was to splash me in the face with salt water like every chance they got. But self-care, regular showers, check. As June rolled into July, though, my enthusiasm and my bank account began to wane a little. I had lost some of my fingertips by using the fine grit sandpaper to polish down those ear bones. And I was in the best shape of my life from that self-imposed, really physically rigorous field work regimen, but I was always just covered in cuts and bruises and marsh mud that wouldn't wash out and weird tan lines. The worst part, the most dire moment was when I actually made and ate hardtack. If you know what that is, if you're a pioneer, so that I could avoid calling home and asking my mom for money. Please don't tell her. And I know it sounds bad, but it really wasn't, not by a long shot. I got to take a time off from the fish dungeon to help the shark lab dissect baby great white sharks. And I still have a stingray stinger from the stomach of one of those sharks as a souvenir. I was trusted with driving the boat every time Erica needed to collect more fish. And even one night I got to see the Disneyland fireworks from my little kayak in the Huntington Beach marsh. By mid-August, I had spent 10 full weeks, 7 days a week, tracking fish, catching fish, feeding and dissecting fish, eating, breathing, and sleeping fish. I really spent everything sacrificing my whole summer for fish, which I didn't even want to study. I was in love with octopuses. People do crazy things for love, right? Like, my crazy thing was dedicating myself to fish, but you know what? It worked. Like Mel said, I spent the last 6 years studying octopuses, chasing them, catching them, tracking them, feeding and dissecting them in California and Alaska, and I lost blood, sweat, and tears, and gained weight, putting in hundreds of hours of octopus research. But really, my work is facilitated by fish still. My advisor at UC Santa Cruz studies moray eels, and my job is to examine why octopuses are losing their arms to fish. And I realized that my path is paved with fish, which is kind of gross, but hey, the things we do for love.